The general fell silent as if waiting for an answer. The door for public impatience had been opened. What could be simpler? Yulia Mikhailovna suddenly raised her voice, annoyed by the fact that everyone, as if on command, turned their eyes towards her. How can there be anything surprising in Stavrogin fighting with Gaganov and not responding to a student? Could he challenge his own former serf to a duel? Portentous words. A clear and simple thought, which, however, had so far not occurred to anyone. Words with extraordinary consequences. Everything scandalous and gossipy, everything petty and anecdotal, was immediately pushed into the background. A different meaning was set forth. A new person was brought forth, in whom everyone had been mistaken. A person of an almost ideal strictness of notions. Mortally offended by a student, that is, by an educated man and no longer a serf, he scorns the insult, because the offender is his former serf. Noise and gossip in society, frivolous society, looks with scorn on the man who has been slapped in the face. He scorns the opinion of society, which has not yet attained to real notions and yet talks about them. I have to read that in the that was Pavir Volokonsky. I'm going to have to read that in. The general stopped talking as though, this is McAndrew. The general stopped talking as though waiting for an answer. The gates for the expression of public opinion were unlocked. What could be simpler? The governor's wife said suddenly and loudly, irritated by the fact that all eyes, as if following a command, had suddenly turned toward her. Is it really so surprising that Stavrogin fought Gaganov but did nothing about the student? After all, he couldn't challenge a former serf of his to a duel, could he? These were weighty words, offering a simple and obvious explanation that somehow had never occurred to anyone, words that had tremendous consequences. Everything indicative of gossip and scandal was immediately relegated to the background, and this new aspect was brought to the fore. The outlines of a new face appeared, the face of a man who had been misunderstood by everyone, a man adhering very strictly to social standards, receiving a deadly insult from a student, that is, an educated, independent man. He disregards that insult because it came from a former serf. Elegant society is shocked and disgusted by a man who has been slapped with impunity. But he despises their opinion because he knows that they do not truly understand the standards of behavior, although they are quick to express their opinions about them. One of those moments that puts Stavrogin in such a glowing celestial light, you know. Yes, and here we are discussing correct behavior, remarked one old gentleman, member of the club, to another in a noble burst of self-castigation. True, my dear sir, the other agreed enthusiastically. One can never predict what young people will do next. But the question here is not of young people in general, a third venerable club member objected. Here we are concerned with not just a young man, but with the most brilliant specimen of the young set. That's the way to look at it. Yes, we needed someone like that around here. We were running out of real gentlemen. Again, I want to mention, this is Dostoevsky's way of telling you about the voice of the people, right? Vox populi, vox Dei. Somehow he's able to just, it's almost like Dostoevsky becomes a man-on-the-street reporter with a microphone. What do you think about what happened with the Stavrogin? You know? The crux of the matter was that the new glamorous personality who had now shown his mettle was also a member of one of the oldest families and one of the richest landowners in the province, and so could not help being a real asset in public life. I've already mentioned in passing the mood of the local landowners. Some people were quite ecstatic. He not only did not challenge that student to a duel, he even forced himself to take his hands off him. That's something worth noticing, sir, someone pointed out. Nor did he drag him through our new courts. Despite the fact that he could have got at least 15 rubles in damages for a personal insult to a born gentleman, ha ha ha. Now, let me tell you something about these new courts, another man butted in a frenzy. If someone gets caught red-handed stealing or embezzling, The best thing he can do is to run home and kill his mother. They'll immediately acquit him, and the ladies in the public gallery will wave their handkerchiefs at him. Believe me, it's the truth. Very true, very true. Of course, they couldn't do without recalling some old stories. They remembered Stavrogin's connections with Count K, whose severe personal disapproval of the latest reforms was well known. He was famous for his extensive activities, although he had slowed down somewhat recently. And now suddenly the public became convinced that Stavrogin was engaged to one of the Count's daughters, although there was really no basis for starting such a rumor. As to mysterious Swiss adventures in Liza Titian, even the ladies ceased to mention them. Let us add also that Mrs. Drozdoff and her daughter had by this time paid all the visits expected of them. Liza was now considered just another young lady, quote, showing off, end of quote, her strained nerves. Now her fainting on the day of Stavrogin's arrival was laid to the student's ugly aggression. People even began to dismiss as commonplace incidents for which the day before they had been seeking the most fantastic explanations. And they completely forgot that a certain cripple had been involved in the story. Even found it too embarrassing to remember it. Quote, anyway, even if there'd been 100 cripples in his life, so what? Weren't we all young once? End of quote. Many commented upon Stavrogin's respectful treatment of his mother and searched for other virtues to ascribe to him. They spoke favorably of the good education he had acquired in the 4 years he had spent in German universities. Gaganov's behavior was declared absolutely unforgivable, and Mrs. von Limp was now definitely credited with uncanny insight. So when Stavrogin himself made his appearance, he encountered a general mood of naive seriousness, realizing from the way everyone looked at him that great things were expected of him. He immediately lapsed into a profound silence, which satisfied his audience infinitely better than if he had saturated them with his conversation. This is showing that he's exactly the opposite of Peter Verkovensky, that said, like, Peter Verkovensky would just be talking before he even entered a room. So when Stavrogin himself made his appearance, he encountered a general mood of naive seriousness. Realizing from the way everyone looked at him that great things were expected of him, he immediately lapsed into a profound silence which satisfied his audience infinitely better than if he had saturated them with his conversation. In short, he could do no wrong. He was in fashion. In provincial society, once a person has appeared in society, he can never hide again. And Stavrogin once again started to perform all his social duties with refinement and perfection. Certainly they didn't acclaim him as an amusing and cheerful guest. Quote, this man has suffered enough in his life, they said. He's not like other people and has good reason to be so pensive and quiet, end of quote. Even his pride and the air of supercilious inaccessibility that had brought him so much hatred 4 years before were now considered impressive and attractive. Mrs. Stavrogin was triumphant, although she may have been sad about the broken plans for her son's marriage with Liza. Family pride, of course, had a large part in her attitude. But the strangest thing of all was that Mrs. Stavrogin had become convinced that her Nikolai really was engaged to a daughter of Count K, although she, like everyone else, had simply succumbed to the wild rumors circulating and had never dared to check it directly with her son. Only once or twice, unable to restrain herself, had she discreetly reproached him for his lack of openness with his mother. Nikolai had smiled, but had remained silent, and to her his silence meant confirmation. But nevertheless, she never forgot about the lame woman. The thought of her lay like a heavy stone on her heart. It was a nightmare that conjured up strange visions and premonitions that became intertwined somehow with her dreams about the Count's daughter. But we shall come back to that. It goes without saying, we shall come back to that. Like, when did there become an established narrator, you know? But we shall come back to that. It goes without saying that Mrs. Stavrogin regained the respect and extreme courtesy she had formerly received in society. But now she took little advantage of it and drove out only very seldom. However, she paid a solemn visit to the governor's wife, for obviously the First Lady's words at the party touched and entranced her more than anyone's. They removed a great deal of the oppression that had been weighing on the poor woman since that unfortunate Sunday. Quote, "I misunderstood her," she said, with characteristic impulsiveness. And to Mrs. von Lemp herself, she simply declared that she'd become, And to Mrs. von Lemp herself, she simply declared that she'd come to thank her. Mrs. von Lemp was highly flattered, but maintained her detachment and reserve. But then she had become extremely conscious of her worth. In fact, she may have had a rather exaggerated idea of it. For instance, she declared in the middle of the conversation that she had never heard anything of Stepan Verkovensky's activities or, for that matter, of his reputation for learning. "Of course, I receive his son, Peter. I'm very fond of him. He's a very impulsive young man, but he's still young, and I must say, he's very well informed. Anyway, he's not just a retired old critic." Wow, that's fantastic. Mrs. Stavrogin hastened to straighten her out on that point. Stepan Verkovensky had never been a critic. On the contrary, she explained, he had always lived in her house, but he was famous because of certain circumstances connected with his earlier career, quote, "that are too well known to the world to need repeating," end of quote. Later, he had become known for his, quote, "works on Spanish history," end of quote. And now he intended to write about contemporary German universities and, she thought, about the Dresden Madonna. Clearly, Mrs. Stavrogin refused to desert Stepan Verkovensky before Julie von Lemp's scorn. "The Dresden Madonna? Surely you mean the Sistine Madonna?" "My dear Mrs. Stavrogin, I must confess I sat in front of that painting for 2 full hours once, and I left rather disappointed. I couldn't make anything of it, and I really wondered what all the fuss was about. Karmazinov, too, says it is rather hard to understand. Nowadays, no one finds anything so remarkable about it. Neither the Russians nor the English. I'd say it has been over-publicized by the older generation," end of quote. Quote, "So I gather there's a new fashion now," end of quote. Quote, "Well, I'm convinced that we shouldn't just dismiss the opinions of the young. People simply brand them as communists. But I think we must treat them with understanding and appreciation. Lately, I've been reading everything. The newspapers, all the proclamations of communes, and all about the natural sciences. I subscribe to everything. For we must understand, mustn't we? The society we live in and with whom we have to deal. One cannot live all one's life shut up in the ivory tower of one's own fantasy. I thought a lot about it and decided to be nice to the young people and thus prevent them from going over the brink. Believe me, Mrs. Stavrogin, only we who belong to the best society can keep them from plunging into the abyss into which they are being pushed by these silly, intolerant old men. Still, I'm very glad to hear all about Mr. Verkovensky. It gives me an idea. We could use him at our literary gatherings. I'm organizing a day-long entertainment to be paid for by subscription. The proceeds to go to needy governesses from our province. They are scattered all over Russia, and there are 6 of them in this district alone. In addition, there are 2 women telegraphists, 2 university students, and many others who would like to follow a career but can't afford the training. The lot of the Russian woman is terrible, Mrs. Stavrogin, my dear. The question is under study in our universities and has even come up before the Council of State. In this strange country of ours, everything is possible. And I think we can guide this great public cause along the proper path only by kindness and the direct participation of all society. Do we really have so many people of great character among us? There are many, of course, but they are scattered all over the place. So let us close our ranks and grow stronger. In short, I will start with a literary matinee followed by a light lunch. Then there will be an intermission, and later in the evening, a ball. We thought of starting the evening with tableau vivant, but that would have been too expensive, so we decided to offer a couple of quadrilles and costumes and masks, representing the best-known literary movements. Mr. Karmazinov gave me that amusing idea. He is a tremendous help to me. And he's going to read his latest piece for the occasion. No one has read or heard it yet. It is his latest and last literary piece, his farewell to the public. It is a charming little work called Merci. He finds the French title more amusing and also more subtle. In fact, I suggested that type of title to him. I suppose Mr. Verkovensky could also read us something if it's not too long or too learned. I believe his son Peter and someone else also want to read something. Peter will stop over at your place and give you the program, or if you'll permit me, I'll drive over myself.